Morning all. Well, good morning on behalf of the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to this morning's session, which is the second in our now weekly business updates with the City of Edinburgh Council. For those who don't know me, my name is Jo Davidson. I'm Head of Policy here at the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce. I'm standing in today for our Chief Executive, Liz McVey, who's on a well-earned break this week. So I will do my best to host the session in her absence. And I am delighted to be joined this morning by Councillor Adam McVey. Hi Adam, who you'll all know of course is the leader of the City of Edinburgh Council, and he's very kindly agreed to come along this morning and deliver this week's update and attend the session. So without further ado really, I'm going to hand over to Councillor McVey and welcome him and thank you again for attending, Adam, this morning.
No problem at all, and thanks very much. I suppose it'd be worth just kind of separating that out into really a bit of an update on the macro stuff and the micro stuff. So macro stuff, the council's paid out more than £104 million now to businesses, 8,000 businesses across the city. When you look at our reject rate, I think it's lower than a lot of other councils in areas in Scotland, mainly because our officers have taken the time to engage more businesses, get additional information and go back to the government quite consistently and ask for specific guidance to allow us to say yes on the maximum number of occasions. I think that's been borne out with the stats that certainly I've seen. Obviously in the last couple of days we've had the £10 million grant for performing arts venues, hugely important to Edinburgh's vibrant ecosystem. Culture and hospitality and tourism and everything works absolutely together in the city, and it would be very unhelpful if one strand of that was to fall over, because the other parts of that ecosystem would be hugely detrimented. So that £10 million for performing arts venues will be administered by Creative Scotland, not the council, but the venues obviously in the city, the venues even owned by the city and the council will benefit from that and help us get back on our feet and get performance arts back on its feet as quickly as possible. In terms of broad tourism and hospitality, there's a paper that's now published going to the committee on Thursday from the council, asking for buy-in to some of the actions that we think we need to take to put hospitality and tourism on a firmer footing. That is looking at how we market the city to the city, how we get people in the city enjoying what we have to offer, which is absolutely enormous, and really repopulate our bars and cafes and restaurants with people across the city who will want to take advantage of that after months and months of lockdown. And part of that is about making sure there's a campaign for that. Part of it is about making sure the channels for that are working properly. So Marketing Edinburgh, for example, like it or love it in a historic setting, we don't feel is the best mechanism for taking a lot of that forward now, particularly in its condition as it is now. So I think we need to look at what is the best model, and how do we maximise that reach and get the biggest bang for buck without spending a whole host of time working out the bureaucracy of the situation, because we just don't have that kind of time before we have to get on and do action points that are meaningful. So there's a whole host of things there to try and drive the strategy of it, I suppose. On the ground, planning, licensing, transport officials are working really closely together to make sure that businesses are looking to gain outdoor space, which will either be for one or two purposes: to operate earlier than otherwise might be able to, or to operate larger than they might otherwise be able to. People will have to look at the constrained indoor space that they've got and work out whether their business model still makes sense in that context. And if it doesn't, and if there's a way of us having outdoor space that can help balance that equation, and help citizens in Edinburgh, residents in Edinburgh, be able to access those businesses, because the last thing we want to see is people queuing up outside pubs, restaurants and bars because there's just not enough capacity for it. I don't think the city will forgive us for that. So We're trying to create a very permissive environment where costs are kept to an absolute minimum, where we can say yes as often as we possibly can, and crucially where permissions that are required are turned around in the absolute quickest time period possible, so that we can get those interventions done on the ground as quick as possible, so that businesses can start up again as quick as possible and get cash flow going again. I don't know that there's an incredible amount more that I want to say. Obviously, there's continuing engagement with festivals, there's continuing engagement with other key industries in the city, with the tech sector. Huge good news last week, £23 million grant towards fintech. That's fairly linked to the City deal process, so it's well timed in that we're starting to see now some of the interventions that we took, some of the investment decisions that we made for the City deal, you know, a couple of years ago in some instances, now paying dividends and now bearing fruit on the ground within our city, giving investment to the city, which is going to create further jobs in key growth, high-tech, high-end and high-salary industries. So I'm happy to answer questions if I can on any aspect of macro, micro, or any industry I've not covered.
Thank you, Adam. That's a whistle-stop overview then, I guess, of some of the big things that have been happening over the course of the last week. Can I open the floor to questions? Does anyone have any questions or even any comments or thoughts or anything they'd like to put towards? Yep, we have a question I see from Andrew Morrison.
Hello, Adam. I'm Andrew Morrison. I'm the owner of a company called AM Bid, and we are Scotland's largest bid and tender specialist. We help organisations, especially small, medium enterprises, with bid writing. Procurement is going to be something that is really going to help, you know, to kickstart things again. So I think it comes in two different ways. One is that decisions are needed on procurements that the City of Edinburgh Council have been undertaking over the last period of X number of months. There's a lot of stalled decisions. I think the most important one that certainly that we've been involved in is the construction services professional framework. And we're starting to see quite a number of construction services consultancies, whether it's architects, quantity surveyors, civil engineers, etc., start to cut staff. But in fact, if they could be told what the decision was on this framework, that there was going to be some work coming towards them, that may help them not to cut staff. The second point is that then work has to start coming through. So we have to start seeing a lot more procurement, you know, coming through, a lot more contracts getting awarded. I appreciate that the council in the early stages were looking at PPE and meal vouchers and housing the homeless and doing lots of things, emergency things that had to be done, and therefore normal procurements kind of went on hold. But surely now the situation could be that lots more could be done to sort of stimulate economic activity.
Thanks. Really helpful question, and actually gives me the opportunity to say a couple of things about what we've done throughout. So the contracts that the council had for things like home to school transport, for example, were sustained throughout that period. So what we did was try and use those contracts which we had, which were predominantly service delivery contracts. And even though the services weren't being delivered, we tried to sustain those payments and cash flow to make sure that our partners, small, medium and large, were able to better weather the storm. And I think actually some of the evidence that we've seen in businesses that I've spoken to have certainly, I think that's paid off. I think those partners have been in a strong position. Just 2 weeks ago, or about a week and a half ago, at the last committee, we had a procurement paper which was about small businesses being part of, small local businesses being part of procurement. And we agreed to set a target of 25% of all council spend to local, small local businesses, SMEs. And while that's going to be enormously difficult to try and balance it because of the nature of the decisions that we take in terms of procurement, it's very based on each individual circumstance of whatever service or good that's been procured. that target is still there. That amounts to something, I think, just shy of £200 million worth of spend. Completely agree on the timescales. The quicker we can get back up and running on terms of our construction projects, there's certainly been no deviation from the ambition we have for the city, and we are not using this, just to be absolutely clear, and I think this message has to ring really loud throughout the city. We're not going to use this situation to try and deviate from the projects that we think are still valuable and needed across our communities. And in that sense, this is a very different experience that I'm expecting Edinburgh to respond with, and I'm expecting both governments to respond with, Scottish and UK, from the last financial crash. The last financial crash, everybody contracted and stopped doing things and stopped, everything was stopped in its tracks, whether it was house building projects in the private sector, whether it was a whole host of other things. We do not take that approach this time. We are deliberately not taking that approach this time. We're continuing with the transport infrastructure projects we think are necessary, the housing projects we think are necessary. There's still additional things happening and being built that we're getting some flack for, actually, in terms of affordable homes and in areas of the city, but we're still ploughing on with it because it's the right thing to do. It's still needed, regardless of what happens in COVID, and that's been our focus. So completely agree. I'm more than happy to chase up the specific of the construction services procurement framework. More than happy to chase that up. I don't know the specifics of it, but I suppose the general sense is we're not pausing on the progress we think the city needs to deliver on.
Thank you, Adam and Andrew, for your question. I don't see any other hands raised or any other points in the chat. Please feel free to do so. But I wonder then, Adam, if I can ask a question. You talked about the criticality of planning and the need for speed and effective or permissive approaches there. Can you talk in a little bit more detail about exactly how the council have gone about that? You mentioned the collaboration with transport and licensing. Can you because that's obviously a big, beer gardens and things open up today. So can you just talk in a little bit more detail about how the council have approached that and what specifically you're doing there?
Sure. I mean, as a starting point, I'll do the typical Edinburgh thing of starting with a negative, but what we don't want to see is bars and restaurants spill out onto pavement space, being blocked in and hemmed in by parked cars on one side and being given a very constrained area to go in when we are trying to support physical distancing. So as a starting point, what we're trying to do, or what I hope we're trying to do, is look at a bit creatively about that space. So in previous years gone by, businesses would have to take out parking space and spill onto that space on road for tables and chairs or whatever else. It would need not only the permissions, but it would need to compensate for the revenue loss of the parking revenue. We've shifted quite significantly on that to try and encourage businesses to come with us to do things that I think would be helpful, not only for their own business, but for the maintenance of that public realm and space. So in terms of the approach, it's led by the licensing team. It's pulling together transport where required, planning where required, and trying to turn around permissions and decisions within a very short time period. Now, we talk quite a lot about the kind of legacies of what COVID might be, and actually the just get it done attitude and the one team approach, actually something I really am reluctant to let go of. I'm reluctant for people to go back into the silos and say, well, that's not a licensing matter, that's a planning matter, or that's a transport matter, it's not a planning matter. Everybody has to work together, and from a business point of view, I completely understand the frustration when you say, well, I've spoken to one department and I've spoken to the other, and you feel like you're getting pushed around from pillar to post. So that kind of no wrong door, single point of contact, I think is something that hopefully we'll see in the next couple of weeks working well, and hopefully we're able to sustain going forward. But it's very much a case of trying to get the right people around the right metaphorical table and get things dealt with as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments that anyone would like to raise? Kieran, I noticed you've got your hand up.
Yeah, old school, hand up, why not? Thanks, Adam. Good to speak to you again. I think last time we spoke, it was very different problems we're talking about. Anyway, you mentioned about a published paper. If we could get a pointer towards that, that would be great, because that is what's going to that is the recovery of our industry. I wanted to say that since opening our diaries with a date, there's been quite a lot of pent-up demand and bookings for our restaurant business. Hotels not so much, conference definitely not, but restaurant yes. For those that don't know, I'm at the Kimpton, so Baba restaurant is seeing a good uptake in bookings, which is good. But my one question for you though, Adam, is what are we doing for this localized campaign and the channels in terms of a new mechanism that does work? And as a business community, what can we do to speed that process up for you?
I mean, in terms of business engagement directly, I think it's probably echoing and sharing some of that messaging. I mean, the point of it is to try and get people one, in the know about what's available in their own city and kind of sharing that. And it's great that individual businesses will be doing well, and it's great to hear you're getting pent up demand for your restaurants, because it's a fantastic restaurant. As you know, we're spoiled in the city that we have a lot of. The macro messaging around that, the citywide messaging, is going to be far more general and towards location-based and towards industry-based. And I suppose the more businesses can echo that kind of messaging on their own channels and their own networks, the better. In terms of the paper, I'm happy to, it's published now, so it's on the council website. It's a bit of a convoluted thing, but you need to go to democracy and then policy and sustainability committee, and then you'll find it in the papers for this Thursday, against the Thursday date. But I'm happy to send the link over to Chamber of Commerce and they can circulate it around if that's probably easier. But I mean, it's really that. It's trying to get a one-team approach, which is generally not about individual businesses, but about the greater sum of the parts. And if Kimpton with channels and customer base can help share some of the things that are also mutually beneficial for retailers on George Street or wherever else, Windsor Street, then you know, all the better, and create that kind of all-in-one. But the wider messaging will be far more, dare I say, emotional to people, to try and get people to I think understand and appreciate the absolute fantastic offer that we have here, and make people want it, because I think people do want it, and it's great that you're kind of experiencing that from your businesses.
Thanks, Adam. Can I just state that one? That's a bit of family in the background there. Sorry. Just on that one, we are actually just hooking up right now with lots of retailers in terms of creating experiences. We think the future is experiences as opposed to purely product. So yeah, any retailers that do have something that's uniquely Edinburgh or regional, absolutely happy to speak to all of them and create packages for our particular markets. And that's definitely on the cards for us. Thanks.
Fantastic.
Thank you for that, Kieran. Any other questions or comments? I don't see anything on the chat. If I can then just ask another question. Adam, apologies, but I guess slightly more negative, I suppose, but in terms of what's happening in Leicester and the possibility of potential sort of resurgences in some areas and therefore local lockdowns, what sort of plans and preparation is the City Council making for that if it happens in Edinburgh, and how are you engaging with others, and how can we engage with you to sort of help that planning process?
It's a very good question on how business can get involved in that planning, because there's so much uncertainty around that, and I wish, you know, uncertainty is one of those words that business doesn't like to hear, and I completely understand why, but this is one that's kind of inescapable. We don't know what December is going to look like in the city, because we don't know what kind of winter we're going to have, and we don't know what this virus is going to do in the winter, and we don't know to what extent restrictions being lifted is going to feed into that. There's a whole heap I don't know in there, and Leicester kind of identifies some of that. While Leicester's now under a different regime than other places, it's still not where we were, you know, 6 weeks ago. So there's some solace in that, which is parts of life will continue as quote unquote normal. The plans that we're putting in place, first and foremost in this space, is around schooling and childcare. So we may have contingency plans that are not about 100% of pupils going back to school. That's what we're hoping for. That's what we're planning for. That's what all our efforts are geared to. Well, not all our efforts, but most of our efforts are geared towards. But we are also planning for that contingency, which will be between 33% of pupils in school at any one time and 50% of pupils in school at any one time. It will be in that space, and we'll very much aim for the 50% if we get there, very much hoping that we don't. But that's the kind of uncertainty that's going to be built in. And I suppose for business, it's understanding that. I don't think, although health warning, I'm not an epidemiologist and I'm not in the Scottish Government, so I can only assess it as best I can, but I don't think later in the year, after schools go back in August, however they go back, I don't think we'll end up in a situation where schools are called off again. I think it's more likely that they'll be in a contingency phase where a proportion of kids are in at any one time. But I don't think we'll see a situation as we have for the last couple of months that pupils are not in school at all. Now, again, that comment has a huge health warning in that I'm so not an expert on this stuff, but I think for businesses planning for the reasonable worst case scenario, the reasonable worst case scenario is between 2/3 and half of your workforce will find it difficult to come into work, potentially, depending on the demographic of your workforce, of course.
Okay, thanks for that. Sorry, it's probably a slightly unfair question, but I do think that, you know, given some of the things that we're seeing at the moment, I think it is probably one that people are starting to kind of wonder about and bear in mind.
Do you know one of the, just on that, one of the things that has made a big difference is business compliance. So businesses not opening when they shouldn't be open has made a big difference to our ability in Edinburgh and in Scotland to keep that R rate well below 1, and it's now well below 1. And if I was to make a plea of businesses at all, it would be absolutely plan for that reasonable worst case scenario and have that in the back of your mind while you're trying to get your business back up and running. But it's also just please stick with us. And when the government, you know, I regularly have my head in my hands when I saw the government guidance come out at the start, because I just thought, what is this going to mean for our services, for the most vulnerable in our communities? It was hugely challenging, but it was really important that we all complied. And if there is guidance that make it more difficult to trade, I completely understand why people would have their head in their hands, but it's so important that we all do our bit. And it cannot be underestimated, the impact of businesses not opening willy-nilly or trying to push the boundaries of that to comply with what was asked of them has made a huge difference in our ability to keep this thing under control. And that ultimately is going to stand us in much better stead in the longer term.
Thank you, Adam, so much for taking the time this morning. We really appreciate it. You know, we're really pleased that the councillor have committed to doing these weekly sessions with us, which is very, very obviously beneficial for us as the chamber, and hopefully for you as a city council, to hear directly from our members and to give our members that opportunity to speak directly to you. There will be another session next Monday, and this will continue on for the foreseeable future. We've also got an interesting session coming up on Friday around active travel, so please take a look at our events page on that one, and we hope to see some of you there. But again, if I can please thank Adam on our behalf, thank you all very much for your attendance and for your contribution this morning, and hopefully we'll see you again next week.